Hello again, everybody, and God be with you. Well, we're just coming up to Christmas, so this week's story is a Christmas story, which ordinarily you'd think would be a lovely story, but as it's in the Bible, baddies, of course, it involves a baddie, and we do know there is a baddie in the story. And the way Bob Hartman tells the story, it also includes ghosts. Traditionally, Christmas time is a time for telling ghost stories. I'm not sure why. I used to enjoy listening to them when I was younger. Well, let's see how Bob introduces this story. It's called The Heartless King's Tale. What do you think of when someone says Christmas? Stars and angels, right? Giving and peace and goodwill. The story of the first Christmas is filled with all those images. But like most stories, it has a villain too. A selfish and cruel villain who does everything he can to rob the story of its wonder. A villain with a dark story all of his own. I thought it would be interesting to set the story of Christmas and Herod's story side by side. The story of Herod and that of the child he tried to kill. Not only because the stories are so different, but also because the difference offers a vivid illustration of the contrast between good and evil, between God's gift of life and one man's deadly ambition. The night was crisp and clear. The stars shone bright like candles. A mother cradled a child in her arms. And when she closed her eyes and listened, she could almost hear the angels sing. The old man in the palace, however, wasn't interested in angels. Ghosts were his companions, and they followed him now wherever he went. It hadn't always been this way. When he was young, there was just too much to do. A kingdom to win, power to establish, and enemies more than he could count to be dealt with and disposed of. And even when the bodies piled up, like stones stacked for his brand new temple, the ghost stayed respectfully silent. How could he have known that they were just waiting for him to grow old and sick, waiting for him to grow tired, waiting for long and lonely winter's nights? The ghost of his uncle, the ghost of his aunt, the ghost of his wife, the ghost of his ambitious sons. Murdered, each and every one, murdered at his command, murdered because they tried to take his throne. I am the king of the Jews, he growled at the darkness, growled at the walls, growled at the noisy company of ghosts. I am the king of the Jews, he growled again. Herod the Great. The walls did not answer. The darkness stayed silent and deep. But a knock at the door startled the king and sent him shaking. Who is it? He whispered. What is it? He called, and his heart slowed to a steady beat only when a servant stuck his head into the room. Visitors, your majesty, the servant answered. At this hour? The king shouted. Tell them to go away. But they say it's urgent, your majesty. They have travelled day and night all the way from Babylon, following a star which they say will lead them to our newborn king. Herod's heart started racing again. First the ghost, and now this. Would he never be able to rest? And so, wearily, he sighed, Send them in. The night was still and peaceful. The angels kept their silent watch. The carpenter kissed the baby and told his wife how he loved her. But in the palace of the king, everyone was stirring. So you're looking for a king? Harold asked his visitors. Yes, one of them answered. The newborn king of the Jews. Herod wanted to say it. He really wanted to tell them, "I am the king of the Jews." But he had to control himself. He knew it if he was to discover what these foreigners were up to. "We have followed a star," explained another visitor, "all the way from Babylon. It led us here to Judea, and we thought you, of all people, might be able to tell us exactly where to find this new king." "And why would you want to find him?" asked Herod suspiciously. "Why? So we could honor him with the gifts we have brought," the visitor answered. "So could you tell us, please?" added a third visitor. "Even a hint would help, a prophecy, perhaps, from one of your holy books." "Stars and prophecies," thought Herod. "Stars and prophecies and ghosts. Why won't they leave me alone?" And for an instant he considered sending these stargazers away. But what if there really was a king, a baby king out there, a king who would one day wrest the throne from him? Then he needed to know about it. He needed to find it. And he needed, most of all, to destroy it before it had a chance to destroy him. And so Herod shouted, "Fetch the priests! No, the chief priests and the scribes as well. Fetch anyone who can help us find this king." The night was a dark blue blanket. It lay over the hills and the shepherds and their sheep, and over the carpenter and his family as they prepared at last to sleep. But in the palace of the king, everyone was awake, wide awake. Herod snapped his fingers. "Hurry," he commanded. "You are the experts in these things, so tell me, where do the prophets say the king of the Jews will be born?" "Well, if it's the Messiah you mean," answered one of the priests, "then the prophets are very clear." "Bethlehem," replied the priest, "according to the words of the prophet Micah." "Excellent," Herod smiled. "Now you may go." "But if I may," asked one of the chief priests, "why is your majesty suddenly interested in this?" "I have my reasons," growled the king. "Now, as I said, you may go." And the priests hurried off into the night. As soon as the priests had gone, Herod sent for the visitors. "Tell me again," he said, "you have been following this star for how long?" "2 years, your majesty," answered one of the visitors. Herod nodded his head. "And so that would make this new king how old?" "No more than 2 years," the visitors explained. "I see," Herod nodded again. "Well, I have good news for you. My priests tell me that Bethlehem is the town you're looking for. It's not far from here." And then, trying hard to look as innocent as possible, he added, "Oh, perhaps you could do me a favor. I, too, would like to honor this new king. So when you have found him, could you come and tell me exactly where he is?" The night was bright with stars, but one star shone brightest of all. It hovered above the house of the carpenter and his family. It waited for the stargazers, just as it had shown them the way. And then it watched as they knocked on the door and were greeted by the sleepy carpenter and went in to worship the child. And when they had offered their gifts and walked out of the house again, it winked goodbye and joined its brothers in the sky. In Herod's palace, however, the king sat alone, alone with his suspicions and fears, alone with the ghosts. "Yes, yes," he muttered, "I know what you're thinking. To make a ghost of a child is the greatest evil of all. But I can't take the chance, don't you see? No, I'm not worried about him growing up and taking my place. I'll have joined your company by then. What worries me is what might happen here and now." What if he has some legitimate claim to the throne? Or what if, God forbid, he really is the Messiah? All my enemies would need to do is get hold of that child and use him against me. Moan all you want, rustle the tapestries, wail through the walls. Do what you will to frighten me, but I will not be moved from my course. When the stargazers return, the child will die, and then he will be yours to deal with. The night crept over the stargazers and swallowed them in sleep. They dreamed of shiny things, of stars in gold and bright perfume bottles. And then something brighter still invaded their dreams, something shinier than their guiding star, purer than their golden gifts, and sweeter smelling than all their balms and ointments. And they knew it could only be a messenger from God. Do not return to Herod, the messenger warned them, for he is a wicked man, and he means to kill the boy. Sneak out of this country, take another route home, and take the secret of the child with you. The stargazers left at once, but Herod awoke with a start, roused by darker spirits perhaps, and called for his guards. There is something wrong, he said. Go to Bethlehem immediately and bring me the visitors from the east. When the soldiers returned with news that the visitors had gone, Herod was not surprised, and he was not worried either, for he had already devised a cruel alternative, so cruel that the soldiers themselves could hardly keep from weeping. You will kill every boy in Bethlehem, he ordered. Every boy 2 years old or younger. You will be quick. You will be thorough. And you will show no mercy. This child will not escape me. As soon as the soldiers departed, the ghosts surrounded Herod. They clawed at his mind and tore at his heart. They raced around inside his head. He would not be moved. But even as their numbers grew, child by murdered child, he would not be moved. Instead, he answered their dying screams with madman cries of his own. I am King of the Jews. I am Herod the Great, and no one will take my throne from me. But as those cries echoed around his dark and ghostly bedchamber, the angels went to work again, warning the carpenter and his family, and guarding them as they crept off safely and escaped into the night. That was the story of Herod. That particular part of the story is only given in Matthew's Gospel, not in the others. And there is some thought as to whether or not those young boys were killed in quite that way. I kind of hope they weren't. Well, that's this year's stories finished with. I'm going to wish you a Merry Christmas. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off, and there'll be another story from the Bible Baddies in January. But as I say, in the meantime, Merry Christmas. God bless you all.